They spent 70 days on a single body, 70 days removing organs, 70 days drying flesh in salt, 70 days wrapping each finger, each toe in strip after strip of linen before sealing the result inside a tomb built to outlast empires. Say the word mummy, and this isn't what comes to mind. We picture a monster instead. A bandaged corpse dragging itself out of a sarcophagus in some flickering film reel. Cursed to walk again, guarding treasure it was buried to protect. Decades of horror movies and campfire folklore turned one civilization's answer to death into a monster movie. Cursed tombs, warnings carved in stone, and vengeful creatures shuffling out of the dark to punish whoever disturbed them. Strip that away, and you're left with the explanation most documentaries settle on instead: mummification as reverence, a farewell gift to someone loved, an elaborate way of saying goodbye to a beloved king or queen. But what if neither version is right? The salt, the oils, the linen, the tomb. What if none of it was really about honoring the dead? What if it wasn't a ceremony, but a procedure? Not a goodbye, but an intervention. Buried in the beliefs of the people who performed this ritual is a stranger possibility. That somewhere in the space between one life and whatever comes after it, a person could be lost, not sent somewhere else, not judged or punished or forgiven, simply lost, the way a name disappears once no one is left to speak it. If that was truly what they feared, then everything we think we understand about mummification, the movies, the folklore, even the museum plaques, is wrong. To understand why an entire civilization would spend its wealth, its priesthood, its imagination on the preservation of a corpse, you have to first let go of what you think you already know. Mummification was not about honoring the dead, it was about saving them. To the Egyptian mind, the body was not a shell to be discarded once the person inside had gone. It was the foundation everything else was built on. Without it, there was no afterlife to walk into, only oblivion. If the body decayed, the soul lost the one anchor keeping it tethered to existence. Preservation was never an act of sentiment. It was a discipline, desperate, meticulous, performed across 70 days on someone who could no longer act to save themselves. The process began with cleansing, not just of the body, but of what the ancient Egyptians considered its spiritual residue. From there, the embalmers moved with a clinical composure that would look, to modern eyes, almost like violence. The brain was drawn out through the nostrils and discarded as unnecessary. The Egyptians placed the seat of a person's mind elsewhere entirely. A single incision opened the abdomen, and the organs were lifted out one by one, washed, and set aside to be preserved in their own right. Then came the salt, not a handful, but a mountain of it. The body was buried beneath heaps of a mineral salt called natron, and left there for 40 days, until every trace of moisture had been drawn out, until someone who once weighed as much as anyone else had lost nearly 3/4 of that weight to the air. What remained was something the Egyptians believed could finally resist time. Only then did the more delicate work begin. Oils and resins, poured and rubbed into skin gone stiff and hollow, meant to soften what the salt had taken and seal what remained. Wherever the drying had stolen a person's shape, the embalmers gave it back. Linen packed beneath sunken skin, false eyes of glass set into empty sockets, wax or bone shaped quietly into the place where a nose had collapsed. This wasn't vanity, it was restoration. meant to ensure that whatever returned to this body would still recognize it as home. Then came the wrapping. Hundreds of square meters of linen wound around every limb, every finger separately, layer after layer, until the person beneath had disappeared entirely into cloth. Between those layers, the embalmers hid what mattered most. Small carved amulets meant to guard specific parts of the body, and somewhere close against the skin, a papyrus scroll containing spells the dead would need on the far side of the grave. Only when all of it was in place was the body finally set into its coffin, the coffin into a sarcophagus, and the sarcophagus sealed inside stone meant to stand forever. To call this a burial is to miss what it actually was. This was not a farewell. This was survival engineering, the desperate, sacred effort to build a body a soul could still call home. Before we can understand what frightened them, we need to understand what they believed a person actually was. We tend to think of a human being as one thing, a body, and inside it, a mind, maybe a soul, if you believe in one. Simple, singular. The Egyptians saw it differently. To them, a person was not one thing wearing a body. A person was several things, held together, each one essential, each one capable of being lost. First, there was the Ka, your double, a kind of second self that came into being the moment you were born and stayed with you your entire life, invisible, walking beside you. When you died, the Ka did not leave. It remained behind, in the tomb, waiting. And like anything that lives, it needed to be fed. This is why the living left food and drink for the dead, generation after generation, not out of sentiment, but because somewhere in that tomb, something was still hungry. Then there was the Ba, closer to what we might call the soul, though even that word doesn't quite capture it. The Ba was pictured as a bird with a human head, and unlike the Ka, it could move. It could leave the tomb by day, cross back into the world of the living, feel the sun again. But freedom like that came with a condition. Each night, the Ba had to return, find its way back to the one body it belonged to, and settle into it, or risk losing its connection to that body forever. And then there was the Ren, your name. It sounds almost too simple to matter until you realize what the Egyptians believed happened if it was ever forgotten. A name spoken was a kind of proof that you had existed at all. Carve it, and it could outlast you by centuries. Erase it, chip it off a monument, let it go unspoken long enough, and something of you began to fade with it. Finally, there was the strangest of them all, the Sahu, a spiritual body distinct from the physical one, which the Egyptians believed had to grow, not appear, but germinate, the way a seed becomes something larger than itself, given the right conditions. Without a preserved physical body to grow from, the Sahu could never take shape, and without a Sahu, there was no vessel left for eternity to occupy. This detail changes everything that came before it. The body the embalmers spent 70 days preserving was never being kept out of sentiment, the way we might keep a photograph of someone we've lost. It was being kept because something depended on it being kept. The Ka needed it as a home to return to. The Ba needed it as an anchor to come back to each night. The Sahu needed it as the ground it would eventually rise from. Take the body away, let it rot, let it burn, let it simply disappear. And you didn't just lose a corpse. You pulled the foundation out from under every other part of a person that was still, in some sense, alive. To the Egyptians, decay was never just a biological process. It was closer to erasure, a gradual unraveling of everything a person had been, piece by piece, until nothing remained to hold it together. But everything we've described so far, the 70 days, the natron, the careful reconstruction of a face, was the ideal. The version reserved for those who could afford eternity in full. Because mummification, for all its spiritual urgency, was never something everyone received in the same way. The Greek historian Herodotus described 3 tiers of the practice, and which one a person received had less to do with how loved they were than with what their family could pay. At the top, the full 70-day ritual, organs preserved separately, amulets carved from lapis lazuli and carnelian. For those who couldn't afford that, the process was stripped to its essentials: a cleansing, a drying, a wrapping, with the same protective symbols now carved from wax or colored glass instead of stone. The fear of the second death didn't discriminate. The odds of avoiding it did. Even the treatment of the organs changed over the centuries. For generations, they were preserved separately in 4 canopic jars, each one watched over by one of the 4 sons of Horus. Later, embalmers began drying the organs and returning them to the body itself. And yet the empty jars kept being placed in the tomb regardless, still standing guard over nothing at all. The symbol had outlived its original function, and no one was willing to let it go. By the later dynasties, the emphasis had shifted again, outward onto the surface. Mummies were often wrapped in elaborate painted cartonnage, a beautiful, lifelike shell, even when the body beneath it had been preserved far more hurriedly than it once would have been. The face got more attention, the flesh less. It would be easy to read that as decline. It wasn't. The belief hadn't changed. The fear of the second death, the need for a preserved anchor, the hope of becoming a Sahu. What changed was only how that belief was expressed. The ritual adapted. The conviction underneath it never did. So, what did the Egyptians actually fear once the body itself was secure? Not divine punishment, not fire, not eternal torment. None of the retribution later religions would attach to an unworthy life. What they feared was colder than that. Erasure. To be gone entirely, as if they had never lived. To understand why, you have to follow the soul into the place the Egyptians called the Duat, the underworld every person had to travel across before they could rest. It was not empty. It was a landscape of gates, each one guarded, and each guardian demanding to be addressed by a secret name the traveler had to already know. Get it wrong, or forget it, or simply lose your way in the dark between one gate and the next, and there was no punishment waiting for you. There was only the possibility that you would wander, unable to move forward until whatever you had been simply stopped. But the true trial, the one every soul eventually had to face no matter how carefully they navigated the gates before it, took place in a chamber called the Hall of Double Ma'at. There, the Egyptians believed, the outcome of your entire existence came down to a single object, your heart. Every other organ had been carefully removed during those 70 days, washed and sealed away in jars of its own. Not the heart. The heart stayed exactly where it had always been, because to the Egyptian mind, it wasn't simply an organ pumping blood. It was memory. It was character. It was the one part of you that had been, for your entire life, quietly keeping score of everything you had done. In that hall, the heart was placed on one side of a great scale. On the other side sat a single feather belonging to Mahat, the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order that the Egyptians believed held the entire universe together. Before the scale could tip either way, the deceased had to speak, out loud, before a tribunal of 42 gods. They recited what's come to be called the negative confession, a long, exacting declaration of everything they swore they had not done. I have not stolen. I have not lied. I have not caused another to suffer. 42 claims of innocence, spoken to 42 judges, with nothing but your own word and the weight of your heart to back it up. Overseeing the weighing itself was Anubis, the jackal-headed god who had guided this person through every stage of their preparation, from the embalming table to this final hall. Standing beside the scale, watching every movement of the needle, was Thoth, the god of writing and wisdom, recording the verdict with perfect, incorruptible accuracy. No god was permitted to tip that scale by even a feather's weight. Whatever the heart weighed, it weighed honestly. If the heart balanced evenly against the feather, light, unburdened, true, the deceased was declared Makeru, justified, true of voice. They passed into the presence of Osiris himself, into an afterlife that asked for nothing more than the world they'd already known, fields to walk, food to eat, people to be with, forever. But if the heart was heavy, weighed down by cruelty, by dishonesty, by a life lived against Mayat rather than within it, there was no second chance waiting on the other side. Crouched beside the scale was a creature unlike anything else in the Egyptian imagination. The head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. Her name was Ammit, the Devourer. But what separates this belief from nearly every vision of judgment that followed it is that Ammit did not punish, and she did not torture. She simply consumed. The instant she took a heart too heavy to pass, that heart and everything it belonged to ceased to exist. No suffering elsewhere, no torment held up as a warning to others, only silence, no memory, no self, and no story left to tell. This was the second death the entire ritual existed to prevent. Not an ending inflicted as punishment, but an ending that erased the very fact that a life had happened at all. It's a colder kind of terror than we're used to. Most modern visions of the worst possible afterlife involve eternal suffering, a hell, a punishment that never lets up. The ancient Egyptians imagined something quieter than that, and in its own way, harder to face. Not a place where you suffer forever, but a place where forever simply stops applying to you, which is why the heart became something to protect, not merely preserve. Egyptians feared that under the pressure of that final trial, a person's own heart might turn against them, testify to sins its owner had tried to hide, even from themselves. So a small carved amulet, a heart scarab, was placed directly over it, inscribed with a spell from the Book of the Dead meant to do one thing only: silence the heart and stop it from betraying the very person it belonged to. That was the real function of the Book of the Dead, not a decoration tucked into the wrappings for tradition's sake, but a survival manual written for exactly this ordeal. It carried the names of the gate guardians who had to be addressed correctly, so no one could wander lost forever. It carried the words that could awaken the small servant figures buried in every well-provisioned tomb, so that even in the afterlife, No one starved for lack of a hand to do the labor. And it carried the negative confession itself, word for word, so that when a person finally stood in that hall, they would know exactly what they needed to say. None of it was superstition dressed up as ritual. To the people who wrote it, buried it, and believed in it completely, it was the only thing standing between a person and disappearing forever. By now, the version of this story that movies gave us should look almost laughable by comparison. Cursed mummies clawing their way out of sarcophagi, booby-trapped tombs rigged to punish anyone who dares disturb them, treasure guarded by the dead, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to take it. None of that captures what was actually happening inside these tombs. To the people who built them, nothing inside was decorative, and nothing was meant to threaten the living. Every object had a purpose, and that purpose had nothing to do with wealth on display. It had to do with survival. The food and drink left beside the body weren't offerings in the way we might leave flowers at a grave. They were meant to be consumed, literally, by the car still waiting there. The small mummiform figures tucked among the linens were labourers, not trinkets, waiting to be called into service by a spell from the Book of the Dead, so that the deceased would never have to till a field or draw water themselves in the next life. Even jewellery carried weight beyond its beauty. A piece worn not just to be seen, but because the Egyptians believed it held real, active power to protect whoever wore it. Nothing in that tomb was symbolic. It was all, in the most literal sense the Egyptians could imagine, for practical use. And underneath all of it, the salt, the linen, the scale, the feather, was a single figure the entire ritual was quietly built around. Osiris. Osiris was proof to the Egyptians that what they were attempting was actually possible. According to the myth, he had been killed. His body had been destroyed, and then, through devotion, ritual, and the deliberate reassembly of everything taken from him, it was restored. He didn't merely survive death, he passed through it and returned changed, whole, eternal. Every mummification that followed was, in some sense, an attempt to walk that same path. Not simply imitating Osiris out of reverence, but repeating a process he had already proven could work. That's the part the treasure hunting version of this story leaves out entirely. This was never a myth about monsters, or curses, or the dead refusing to stay buried. It was a myth about a way through. One god's death and return, offered up as evidence that the same might be possible for anyone willing to do the work. So, we return to where we began. 70 days. Salt and linen and stone. It is tempting to call all of it superstition, an elaborate, ultimately futile attempt to cheat something no civilization has ever actually cheated. But that misses what the ancient Egyptians were really telling us about themselves, and maybe about anyone who has ever wondered, standing at the edge of a life, what waits. They didn't preserve their dead because they were sentimental. They preserved them because they believed, with total conviction, that a person could unravel. Not all at once, the way a body falls, but slowly, piece by piece, until nothing was left holding the pieces together. The body decays, and the bar loses its way home. The name goes unspoken, and something of you starts to fade with it. The heart is weighed and found wanting, and there is no punishment waiting on the other side of that failure, only the quiet, absolute end of being anyone at all. To the Egyptians, eternity was never handed out freely. It had to be earned, on two fronts at once. You had to live a life balanced enough, honest enough, to satisfy a feather that weighed almost nothing at all. And you had to leave behind a body cared for well enough that something of you would still have somewhere to return to. Get either one wrong, and it didn't matter how loved you had been, or how many prayers were said over you. The second death did not ask who missed you. It only asked whether you had passed the trial, and whether there was still a home for you to come back to. There's something quietly devastating in that. Strip away the gods, the jackals, the scales, and what's left is a civilization that understood, better than most, that being forgotten is its own kind of death. That long before the body fails, a person can begin to disappear the moment no one remembers their name. The moment nothing physical remains to anchor who they were. Maybe that's why this story still unsettles us thousands of years later. Long after we've stripped away the horror movies and the curses, not because we're afraid of mummies, but because somewhere beneath all of it, we recognize the fear that built them. The ancient Egyptians did not fear death. They had already made peace with that. What they feared, what they spent 70 days and an entire civilization's imagination trying to prevent, was disappearing so completely that it would be as though they had never lived at all. So here's the question they were really asking 3,000 years ago, and in a sense, never stopped asking. If nothing physical remained of you, no name spoken, no memory kept, nothing left to anchor who you were, would you have ever really existed at all?